The crash of thunder split the sky wide open, and that was when rancher Cole Brennan saw her collapsed beside the old fence post, her body trembling like a newborn foal in the driving rain that turned the Texas prairie into a churning sea of mud and water. He spurred his horse forward without hesitation, his heart hammering harder than the rain pounding against his oilskin coat as he dismounted and knelt beside the woman who lay unconscious in the storm. Her dark hair plastered to her pale face, and her dress torn and filthy from what must have been miles of desperate travel. Cole gathered her into his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite being completely soaked through, and he hoisted her up onto his saddle before climbing up behind her, holding her secure against his chest as he urged his gelding toward the ranch house that sat a half-mile distant, its lights barely visible through the sheets of rain that felt like needles against his weathered skin. The storm had blown in sudden and vicious that April evening in 1878, the kind of tempest that reminded every soul in Brewster County just how small and fragile they truly were against the raw power of the West Texas wilderness. Cole had been riding the fence line when the first drops fell, checking for breaks after the cattle had gotten restless earlier in the day, and he had almost turned back when something made him push forward just a little farther, some instinct he could not name but had learned long ago never to ignore. Now he understood why, as the woman in his arms let out a soft moan that was nearly lost beneath the howl of wind and the relentless drumming of rain against the earth. The ranch house rose before them like salvation itself, the sturdy wooden structure built by his father 20 years prior when this land had been even wilder than it was now, back when Comanche raids were still a real threat and every settler lived with a rifle within arm's reach at all times. Cole's younger brother Matthew had clearly seen them coming because the door flew open before they reached the porch, and Matthew's eyes went wide with shock as Cole carried the unconscious woman across the threshold and into the warmth of their home. "Good Lord, Cole, who is that?" Matthew demanded, quickly shutting the door against the storm that tried to follow them inside. "Where did you find her?" "Out by the southern fence line," Cole said, his voice rough with concern as he carried his burden toward the massive stone fireplace that dominated the main room, its flames crackling cheerfully in stark contrast to the violence of the weather outside. She was just lying there in the mud. "No horse, no wagon, nothing. Matthew, get some blankets and wake Rosa. This woman needs dry clothes and medical attention." Matthew, who at 19 was 6 years younger than Cole but every bit as capable in a crisis, sprinted toward the back of the house where their housekeeper, Rosa Mendoza, had her small quarters. Cole knelt before the fire and carefully laid the woman down on the thick bearskin rug that covered the wooden floor, his hands surprisingly gentle for someone who spent his days working with cattle and horses and barbed wire. In the firelight, he could see her more clearly now, and his breath caught slightly in his chest at what he saw. She was beautiful in a way that seemed almost out of place in this harsh landscape, with delicate features that spoke of gentler environments and easier living, though the calluses he had felt on her hands suggested she was no stranger to hard work. Her dress, though torn and mud-stained, had once been a fine piece of clothing, pale blue cotton with tiny white flowers embroidered along the collar, the kind of dress a woman might wear to church or to town on special occasions. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with dark lashes that lay against her cheeks like shadows and lips that held a faint blue tinge that worried Cole more than he wanted to admit. Rosa arrived in a flurry of rapid Spanish and motherly concern, her gray-streaked hair hastily pinned up, and her weathered face creased with worry as she knelt beside the unconscious woman. Rosa had been with the Brennan family since Cole's mother had died giving birth to Matthew, serving as housekeeper and cook and surrogate mother to 2 grieving boys and their father, and she took charge of the situation with practiced efficiency that came from years of frontier, living where emergencies were simply part of existence. "She is very cold," Rosa said, switching to English as she placed her hand against the woman's forehead. "We must get her out of these wet clothes immediately or she will catch pneumonia. Matthew, do not stand there gaping like a fish. Bring me the blankets and then go heat water for tea. Cole, you must leave now so I can tend to her properly." Cole found himself reluctant to leave, which surprised him because he was not a man given to sentiment or unnecessary concern for strangers. But there was something about this woman that had gripped him from the moment he saw her lying helpless in the storm. Still, he was nothing if not respectful of propriety and Rosa's formidable will, so he pushed himself to his feet and stepped back, his wet boots leaving muddy prints on the floor that he knew he would hear about later. "I will be in the kitchen," he said quietly. "Call me if you need anything." He retreated to the adjacent room, stripping off his own soaked coat and hat and hanging them by the back door before running his hands through his dark hair that curled slightly when wet. Through the doorway, he could hear Rosa and Matthew working to help the stranger, their voices low and efficient, and Cole found himself pacing like a caged animal, his mind churning with questions that had no immediate answers. Who was she? Where had she come from? What had driven her to be out alone in such dangerous weather, wandering the prairie on foot with no provisions or protection? The nearest town of any size was Alpine, 15 miles to the north, and the small settlement of Marathon was even farther to the east. His ranch sat in relative isolation, which was how Cole preferred it, but that isolation made the woman's presence all the more mysterious and concerning. Matthew joined him after several minutes, his young face troubled as he began preparing tea with the efficiency of someone who had been managing a household alongside his older brother since their father had died 3 years prior. "Rosa says she is breathing well and her color is improving now that she is warming up," Matthew reported, "but she has not woken yet. Do you think she hit her head? There could be an injury we cannot see." "Possibly," Cole said, leaning against the rough wooden counter and crossing his arms over his chest. "Or she might simply be exhausted. If she walked very far in this storm, her body might have just given out." He paused, then added quietly, "We will have to wait until she wakes to learn what happened to her. In the meantime, we keep her warm and safe. Tomorrow, if the storm passes, I will ride into Marathon and speak with Sheriff Garrett. Someone must be looking for her." The storm raged through the night with undiminished fury, rattling the shutters and hammering at the roof while Cole sat in a chair near the fireplace, refusing to go to bed despite Rosa's scolding and Matthew's practical suggestions that there was nothing more to be done until morning. They had moved the woman to the guest bedroom, a small but comfortable room that had once belonged to Cole's mother, and Rosa had changed her into one of her own nightgowns and wrapped her in layers of warm blankets. Cole had looked in on her twice, standing in the doorway and watching the steady rise and fall of her chest beneath the quilts, relieved each time to see that her breathing remained strong and even. Something had shifted in him the moment he found her, though he could not articulate exactly what or why. Cole Brennan was not a romantic man by nature or circumstance. At 25, he had spent most of his adult life focused on building the ranch into something successful and sustainable, on honoring his father's legacy and ensuring Matthew had opportunities beyond the hard scrabble existence that defined so many lives in West Texas. There had been women, of course, a few brief courtships that had come to nothing because Cole could never quite convince himself to settle for affection when what he secretly hoped for was something more, something deeper and more consuming than mere compatibility or convenience. Now, watching a complete stranger sleep in his mother's old room, he felt something stir in his chest that he had not experienced before, a fierce protectiveness mixed with a curiosity that went beyond simple concern for an injured traveler. He told himself it was only natural to feel this way about someone he had saved from the storm, that any decent person would experience similar emotions. But even as he formed these rational explanations, some deeper part of him knew they were incomplete at best and dishonest at worst. Dawn broke gray and sullen, the storm having exhausted itself sometime in the small hours of the morning, leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping with countless tiny waterfalls where the rain drained from every surface. Cole had finally dozed in his chair, his long legs stretched out before the fire and his head tilted back at an angle that would surely leave his neck aching, when Rosa's urgent voice pulled him from sleep. "Cole, Cole, come quickly. She is awake." He was on his feet and moving before his eyes had fully opened, his heart suddenly racing as he followed Rosa into the guest bedroom. The woman was indeed awake, propped up against the pillows with wide eyes that were a striking shade of green, like new grass after spring rain. She looked frightened and confused, her gaze darting around the unfamiliar room before landing on Cole with an intensity that made him pause in the doorway. "It is all right," he said softly, holding up his hands in a gesture meant to be reassuring. "You are safe here. I am Cole Brennan and this is my ranch. I found you last night during the storm. Do you remember what happened to you?" The woman opened her mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, her brow furrowing with obvious distress. She tried again, her voice coming out rough and hoarse from disuse and exposure. I was running. The wagon overturned. I had to keep moving. Where were you coming from?" Cole asked, moving slowly into the room and settling himself carefully on the chair beside the bed, aware that his size and presence might be intimidating to someone who had just endured what she clearly had. "Who were you traveling with?" She closed her eyes briefly, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed hard. "My name is Catherine Webb. I was coming from Fort Davis with my uncle and his wife. We were traveling to Alpine where my uncle had business, but the storm caught us on the road. The horses panicked and the wagon overturned into a ravine. My uncle, he struck his head on a rock. He died instantly. My aunt was injured badly. She told me to go for help, to leave her and find someone who could bring aid." Cole felt his stomach tighten with sympathy and dread. "How long ago did this happen? Where exactly did you leave your aunt?" Catherine's eyes flew open again, bright with tears and desperate hope. "Yesterday afternoon, I think. I do not know exactly. I walked for hours trying to find anyone. The storm got worse and I became confused about which direction I was going. Please, you must help me find her. She could still be alive. We have to go back." She tried to push herself up from the bed, but her body betrayed her, her arms shaking with weakness and her face going pale with the effort. Rosa immediately pressed her back down with gentle but firm hands, making soothing sounds in Spanish while Cole leaned forward, his voice calm but serious. "Miss Webb, you are in no condition to go anywhere right now, but I promise you, I will leave immediately to search for your aunt. Can you tell me anything about the location? Any landmarks you remember? Anything at all that might help me find where the wagon went off the road?" Catherine pressed her hands to her face, clearly struggling to organize her fragmented memories of the previous day's trauma. There was a large outcropping of red rock, shaped almost like a hand reaching up from the earth. The road curved sharply around it, and that is where the horses lost their footing. The wagon went over the left side, down into a steep ravine filled with brush and small trees. Cole knew exactly where she meant. The formation was a well-known landmark about 8 miles south of the ranch, on the main road between Fort Davis and Alpine. He felt a sinking sensation in his gut, because 8 miles was a tremendous distance for anyone to walk in a storm, let alone a woman alone and frightened and struggling through mud and darkness. That Catherine had made it as far as his ranch was nothing short of miraculous, though whether her aunt had survived the night in an overturned wagon with serious injuries was another question entirely. "I know the place," he said, rising to his feet with purpose. "Matthew and I will ride out immediately. Rosa, stay with Miss Webb and make sure she rests. See if you can get some food into her." He turned back to Catherine, and the desperate hope in her eyes made his chest ache. "I will do everything I can to find your aunt and bring her back safely. But you must promise me you will stay here and let Rosa care for you. What you did, Walking through that storm alone was incredibly brave, but you are no good to anyone if you collapse again from exhaustion. Please hurry, Catherine whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. She was bleeding so badly I should never have left her. I should have stayed. If you had stayed, you both would have died, Cole said with quiet certainty. You made the right choice even though it was a hard one. Now let me go make it count for something. He left the room quickly, already calling for Matthew as he headed for the barn. His brother appeared from the bunkhouse where he had apparently been tending to the horses, and Cole filled him in on the situation in rapid sentences, as they saddled two of their fastest mounts and gathered supplies that might be needed for an injured woman stranded in the wilderness. The ride to the Red Rock Formation felt interminable despite the horses' swift pace, and Cole found his mind divided between worry for Catherine's aunt and thoughts of Catherine herself. She had shown remarkable strength and determination to walk so far in such terrible conditions, driven by love for her family and the desperate hope of finding help. What kind of life had she led before yesterday's tragedy? What had brought her family through this unforgiving landscape? And why did the memory of her green eyes and frightened face affect him so profoundly when he barely knew her at all? They found the overturned wagon exactly where Catherine had described it, the vehicle lying on its side in the ravine like a discarded toy, its contents scattered across the muddy slope. Cole's heart sank as he and Matthew scrambled down the treacherous incline, calling out for any sign of life. The body of a middle-aged man lay partially beneath the wagon, clearly dead as Catherine had reported, and Cole felt a surge of sympathy for the woman lying in his guest room who had lost her uncle so suddenly and violently. Matthew found the aunt 20 feet from the wagon, half hidden beneath a tangle of brush where she had apparently crawled seeking shelter from the storm. She was unconscious and deathly pale, with a deep gash across her forehead and her left arm bent at an unnatural angle, but when Cole pressed his fingers to her throat, he felt the faint but steady beat of her pulse. "She is alive," he said, his voice tight with relief and urgency. "But we need to move fast. Matthew, help me get her up the slope. We will have to ride hard for Marathon and hope Dr. Ellis is sober enough to help." It took considerable effort and care to extract the injured woman from her shelter and carry her up the muddy ravine to where the horses waited. They wrapped her in blankets and secured her as gently as possible across Matthew's saddle, knowing that the ride would be agonizing for her if she regained consciousness, but having no better option available. Cole took one last look at the dead man lying in the wreckage, committing his face to memory so he could describe him to Sheriff Garrett and ensure proper arrangements were made for burial, then mounted his own horse and led the way toward Marathon at a pace just short of reckless. The small settlement of Marathon consisted of a general store, a saloon, a church, a handful of houses, and the combination office and living quarters of Sheriff Thomas Garrett, with Dr. Benjamin Ellis maintaining a practice in a converted stable building at the edge of town. They found the doctor in his office, thankfully clear-eyed and competent despite his reputation for drinking, and Cole helped carry Catherine's aunt inside while Matthew rushed to find the sheriff and explain the situation. "She has lost a lot of blood," Dr. Ellis said grimly as he examined his patient, his gnarled hands surprisingly gentle as they probed the woman's injuries. "The head wound is serious and this arm is badly broken, but she is strong, and if infection does not set in, she has a fighting chance." "You found her just in time, Mr. Brennan. Another day out there and it would have been too late." Cole felt some of the tension drain from his shoulders, though he knew the situation remained precarious. "I will pay whatever is needed for her care," he said. "And I need to get word back to my ranch immediately. Her niece is there, and she has been frantic with worry." Sheriff Garrett arrived with Matthew close behind, and Cole spent the next hour providing a detailed account of the accident site and Catherine's arrival at his ranch. The sheriff, a weathered man in his 50s with keen eyes and a reputation for fairness, listened carefully, and asked practical questions about the dead man and any belongings that might help identify the family or determine their final destination. "I will ride out to the site with a wagon and some men to retrieve the body," Garrett said, "and I will see if there is anything in the wreckage that might tell us more about these folks. In the meantime, Mr. Brennan, it seems this Miss Webb is fortunate you found her when you did. Are you willing to continue providing her shelter until her aunt recovers enough to make other arrangements?" "Of course," Cole said immediately, without hesitation. "She is welcome to stay at the ranch as long as necessary. My housekeeper Rosa will ensure she is properly cared for and chaperoned. This is the least we can do after what she has been through." He left Marathon as soon as the doctor assured him there was nothing more to be done for the aunt at present, promising to return in a day or two to check on her condition and settle the medical expenses. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than the journey out, though the sun was now high in a sky scrubbed clean by the previous night's storm, and Cole found himself eager to return to Catherine with news that would ease at least some of her terrible burden. She was sitting up in bed when he arrived, dressed in one of Rosa's simple dresses that was too large for her slender frame, her dark hair hanging loose around her shoulders in damp waves. Rosa had clearly been brushing it, and there was a tray of half-eaten food on the bedside table that suggested Catherine had managed to regain at least some of her strength. She looked up as Cole entered the room, her green eyes searching his face with desperate intensity, and he quickly moved to reassure her before she could spiral into panic. "Your aunt is alive," he said, and watched relief crash over Catherine's features like a physical wave. "She is badly hurt, but Dr. Ellis says she has a good chance of recovery. She is in Marathon now, receiving proper medical care. I am so sorry, Miss Webb, but your uncle was already gone when we found him. There was nothing anyone could have done." Catherine's face crumpled with grief, and she pressed both hands over her mouth as if to hold back the sobs that wanted to escape. Rosa moved quickly to embrace her, making soft, comforting sounds, and Cole felt suddenly awkward and intrusive standing there watching this private moment of anguish. But Catherine looked up at him through her tears, her voice breaking as she spoke. Thank you for going after her. I was so afraid you would find her too late. My uncle? I knew he was gone. I saw it happen. But Aunt Margaret, she was still talking to me when I left. She told me to be brave and to run fast. I cannot believe she survived the whole night alone out there. She must be so strong." "Strength clearly runs in your family," Cole said quietly. "What you did took tremendous courage, Miss Webb. Not many people could have walked through what you walked through and kept going until they found help." She shook her head slightly, tears still streaming down her face. "I had no choice. I could not let her die out there without at least trying. She and Uncle Robert took me in when I had nowhere else to go. They were all the family I had left." Her voice caught on the word "were," and Cole felt his heart constrict with sympathy for this young woman who had lost so much in such a short time. Over the following days, Catherine slowly regained her physical strength, though the emotional toll of her ordeal remained visible in the shadows beneath her eyes, and the way she sometimes seemed to drift away into private grief when she thought no one was watching. Cole found himself drawn to her company far more than was strictly appropriate, inventing reasons to check on her recovery or engage her in conversation during meals that Rosa served at the large wooden table in the main room. He learned that Catherine had been living with her aunt and uncle for 2 years, since her parents had died in a yellow fever outbreak that swept through Houston in 1876. She was 22 years old, unmarried, and had been working as a seamstress and teacher to help support her aunt and uncle's household. They had been traveling to Alpine because Uncle Robert had been offered a position managing a new mercantile store, an opportunity that promised a better life and more stability than they had known in Fort Davis. "I feel so guilty," Catherine confessed one evening as she and Cole sat on the porch watching the sun set over the vast expanse of prairie that surrounded the ranch. My uncle died trying to give us a better life, and now Aunt Margaret has lost her husband and has terrible injuries, and I am here safe and comfortable while she lies in pain in a strange doctor's office. It feels wrong somehow." "Your aunt would want you here getting well," Cole said firmly. "And you will be no good to her if you exhaust yourself before she is strong enough to need your help. Dr. Ellis sent word that she regained consciousness yesterday and has been asking about you. Matthew is planning to ride into Marathon tomorrow to check on her progress, and you can send a letter if you want to let her know you are safe and thinking of her." Catherine turned to look at him, and in the golden light of the dying sun, her beauty struck him anew with an almost physical force. "You have been so kind to us, Mr. Brennan. I do not know how we will ever repay you for everything you have done. The doctor's fees alone must be considerable, not to mention the imposition of housing me here for so long." "It is not an imposition," Cole said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "And please call me Cole. I'm not much for formality when I can help it. As for repayment, there is nothing to repay. This is simply what neighbors do for each other out here. We all depend on one another to survive. Today I help you, tomorrow someone helps me. That is how the West works when people choose to be decent about it." "Still," Catherine said softly, "not every man would have ridden out in the aftermath of a terrible storm to search for a stranger's injured relative. Not every man would have opened his home and paid medical expenses for people he had never met before. You are a good man, Cole Brennan, and I think your parents would be very proud of the person you have become." Her words affected him more deeply than they probably should have, warming something in his chest that had been cold for longer than he cared to admit. He found himself wanting to tell her things he rarely shared with anyone, about the loneliness of running a ranch with only his teenage brother for company, about the dreams he had for expanding their cattle operation, and maybe someday having a family of his own to fill the 2 empty rooms of this house his father had built with such hope and determination. Instead, he simply said, "Thank you, Catherine. That means more to me than you might realize." The days stretched into weeks, and Catherine became a natural part of the household in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. She helped Rosa with cooking and mending, taught Matthew to improve his reading and writing during the evenings, and even learned to tend the vegetable garden that provided fresh produce during the growing season. Cole found himself timing his return from the day's work to coincide with the dinner hour, looking forward to the sight of Catherine's smile, and the sound of her laughter when Matthew told some ridiculous story about his misadventures with the cattle. Aunt Margaret's recovery was slow but steady, and Catherine rode into Marathon with Cole twice a week to visit her, watching with tearful joy as the older woman gradually regained her strength and clarity of mind. They held a simple funeral for Uncle Robert in the Marathon Cemetery, attended by the handful of people who had known him during his brief time in the area. And Catherine stood straight and dry-eyed through the service, her hand gripping her aunt's good hand as they said goodbye to the man who had given them both a home when they needed one most. "What will you do now?" Cole asked Catherine one afternoon in late May as they rode back from one of these visits, the prairie around them carpeted with wildflowers that had sprung up in the wake of the spring rains. "Once your aunt is well enough to travel, will you still go to Alpine?" "Try to make a life there." Catherine was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the horizon where heat shimmers made the distant mountains waver like mirages. "I do not know," she finally said. "The position Uncle Robert was meant to take no longer exists for us, obviously. And Alpine is a strange place where we know no one and have no real prospects. I have been thinking perhaps we should return to Houston, try to rebuild what we lost there. But Aunt Margaret says she cannot bear to go back to the place where so many memories of my uncle remain. Every street corner would remind her of him. Every familiar building would feel like a ghost. What about you?" Cole asked, trying to keep his voice casual even as his heart began to beat a little faster. "What do you want to do, Catherine? If you could choose anything, what would you choose?" She turned to look at him, and he saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch, a softness and longing that mirrored feelings he had been trying to suppress for weeks now. "I think," she said slowly, carefully, "that I have been happier these past weeks at your ranch than I have been in a very long time. I like the work, even though it is hard. I like the simplicity and the honesty of this life. I like the people." She paused, then added even more quietly, "I like you, Cole. More than I probably should, given that I am a guest in your home and in your debt." Cole felt something shift in his chest, like a key turning in a lock he had not known was there. He reined in his horse, and Catherine did the same, the two of them sitting there on the prairie with the sun beating down and the wind carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. "You are not in my debt," he said firmly. "And I like you too, Catherine. More than I probably should, given that you are going through a terrible time and are vulnerable, and I should not be taking advantage of that. But I cannot seem to help myself. Every day I look forward to seeing you. Every conversation we have makes me want to have a dozen more. When I am out working, I find myself thinking about what you might be doing, wondering if you are happy or sad or worried about your aunt. I think about your smile. I think about the sound of your voice. And I know it is too soon and too complicated, but I cannot deny what I am feeling anymore." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling through them, an expression of such pure happiness that it transformed her face into something radiant. "It is not too soon for me," she said. "I have been alone for so long, Cole. Even when I lived with my aunt and uncle, even when I was surrounded by people in Houston, I felt alone in some fundamental way, like I was waiting for something or someone without knowing what or who I was waiting for. And then you found me in the storm and carried me into your home, and everything changed. You made me feel safe and valued and seen in ways I have never felt before. So no, it is not too soon. Not for me." He dismounted in one fluid motion and came to her side, reaching up to help her down from her horse. She slid into his arms, and for a moment they simply stood there holding each other, the horses forgotten and the world reduced to just the two of them and the enormous sky overhead. Then Cole cupped her face in his calloused hands and kissed her with a gentleness that belied the intensity of emotion coursing through him. And Catherine kissed him back with equal tenderness and growing passion that sent heat racing through his blood. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless and flushed with more than just the afternoon heat, Cole rested his forehead against Catherine's and spoke words that felt both terrifying and necessary. "I am falling in love with you, Catherine Webb. I know we have not known each other long, and I know the circumstances are complicated, but my heart does not seem to care about any of that. It wants what it wants, and what it wants is you." "I am falling in love with you too," Catherine whispered. "And my heart does not care about complications either. It just knows that you are good and honest and brave, and that being near you feels like coming home after a very long journey through cold and darkness." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, their horses walking close together, and though they did not speak much, the silence between them was comfortable and full of promise. When they arrived home, Rosa took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly, muttering something in Spanish about stubborn men and patient saints before shooing them both out of her kitchen, so she could finish preparing dinner in peace. That evening, Cole asked Matthew to take a walk with him down to the creek that ran along the eastern edge of their property, and the two brothers sat on the bank skipping stones across the water, while Cole tried to find the right words to explain what was happening between him and Catherine. "I am not blind, Cole," Matthew said with a grin before his older brother could even begin his carefully prepared speech. "I have seen the way you two look at each other. I have heard you laughing together on the porch after you think everyone else has gone to bed. I am happy for you. Catherine is wonderful, and you have been alone too long trying to take care of everyone else without anyone taking care of you." Cole felt a rush of affection for his brother, who had grown from a grieving child into a thoughtful young man almost without Cole noticing. "I want to ask her to stay," he said quietly. Not just until her aunt recovers, but permanently. I want to ask her to marry me, Matthew, but I need to know you would be all right with that, with having Catherine here as a permanent part of our family. Are you actually asking my permission? Matthew said, his grin widening. Because that is ridiculous, Cole. You are the head of this family and you deserve to be happy. Besides, I already think of Catherine almost like a sister. She is patient and kind, and she makes you smile in ways I have not seen since before Pa died. If you want to marry her, then marry her with my blessing and my joy at finally having a woman around who can teach you some manners. Cole laughed and shoved his brother's shoulder affectionately, feeling lighter than he had in years. When did you get so wise? I had a good teacher, Matthew said simply. Now go talk to Rosa and make sure she is all right with this too, because if you spring a wedding on her without proper warning, she will have both our hides. Rosa, as it turned out, had been expecting this conversation and had very specific opinions about the proper way to conduct a courtship and proposal in a respectable household. She lectured Cole for 20 minutes about propriety and reputation, and making sure Catherine's aunt was consulted before any formal arrangements were made, all while smiling so broadly that her weathered face seemed to glow with happiness. That girl has brought light back into this house, Rosa said, patting Cole's cheek with maternal affection. And she has brought light back into your eyes, Mijo. Your mother would have loved her and your father would have approved completely. But you must do this correctly, with honor and respect for Catherine and her aunt. Go to Marathon tomorrow and speak with Mrs. Webb. Ask for her blessing before you ask Catherine to marry you. This is the right way, the way that shows you value Catherine and her family properly. So the next morning, Cole rode alone to Marathon, his heart pounding with a nervousness he had not felt since he was a boy about to receive punishment for some childhood transgression. He found Aunt Margaret sitting up in bed at Dr. Ellis's office, looking frail but alert, her broken arm in a sling and the wound on her head healing into what would likely be a permanent scar. She smiled when she saw Cole and gestured for him to take the chair beside her bed. I wondered when you would come to see me without Catherine, she said, her voice still weak but her eyes sharp with intelligence and understanding. You want to talk about my niece, I think. About intentions and futures, and whether an old woman gives her blessing to something that has clearly already begun. Cole felt his face heat with embarrassment at being so transparent, but he met her gaze steadily. Mrs. Webb, I will not insult your intelligence by pretending I do not have feelings for Catherine. These past weeks have shown me what I have been missing in my life and what I want for my future. I love your niece, and I want to marry her if she will have me. But I would never presume to move forward without your knowledge and blessing. Catherine has suffered too many losses already. I will not be responsible for creating any division between the two of you. Aunt Margaret studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she reached out with her good hand and took his, squeezing with surprising strength. My husband and I took Catherine in when she was alone and grieving, and we loved her as if she were our own daughter. His dying wish, which he managed to gasp out to me before he lost consciousness, was that I make sure Catherine was taken care of, that she found happiness and security. I thought that would mean finding her a suitable husband in Alpine, perhaps a merchant or a banker, someone stable and respectable. But now I see that God had other plans and perhaps better ones. She paused, her eyes growing misty with tears. You saved both our lives, Mr. Brennan. You could have left us in that ravine to die, and no one would have blamed you for choosing not to risk yourself and your brother in the aftermath of that storm. But you did not hesitate. You rode out into the mud and the danger because it was the right thing to do, because someone needed help. That kind of character cannot be faked or taught. It simply is. And I believe my Catherine deserves a man of character, a man who will protect her and cherish her and give her the life of meaning and purpose she craves. Is that a yes? Cole asked, hardly daring to hope. That is absolutely a yes, Aunt Margaret said, smiling through her tears. You have my blessing to marry my niece, Cole Brennan, with my whole heart behind it. And when I am well enough, I expect an invitation to the wedding so I can see with my own eyes the happiness you two have found together in the midst of all this tragedy." Cole left Marathon feeling as if he could float off his horse and soar into the cloudless May sky. He stopped at the general store and spent an unreasonable amount of his carefully saved money on a simple gold ring, the only one the shopkeeper had in stock, hoping it would fit Catherine's slender finger and praying she would say yes when he finally worked up the courage to ask her the question that would determine the shape of his entire future. He returned to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple that seemed impossibly vivid, as if nature itself was celebrating the potential joy that lay ahead. Catherine was in the garden with Rosa, harvesting lettuce for dinner, and when she saw Cole riding up, she straightened and waved, her smile bright and welcoming. He waved back, his heart so full he thought it might burst, and began planning how and when he would ask her to be his wife. The opportunity came 2 days later, when Cole suggested they ride out to his favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise overlooking a valley where wildflowers grew so thick they looked like a painted carpet spread across the earth. Catherine agreed eagerly, clearly grateful for any chance to escape the routine of household chores and explore more of the landscape she had come to love. They rode slowly, talking about everything and nothing, and Cole found himself memorizing details he wanted to remember forever. The way Catherine's hair caught the light, the sound of her laughter when he told a story about Matthew's first disastrous attempt at roping cattle, the graceful way she sat her horse as if she had been riding all her life instead of just learning over the past few weeks. When they reached the overlook, Cole helped Catherine dismount and then spread out the blanket he had brought along. Along with the basket of food, Rosa had packed with a knowing smile and explicit instructions not to return until they had talked properly about important things. They sat side by side, eating cheese and bread and dried apples while looking out over the sea of flowers below, and Cole felt peace settle over him like a benediction. "Catherine," he said eventually, setting aside his food and turning to face her fully, "I spoke with your aunt 2 days ago. I rode to Marathon specifically to see her without you there because I needed to have a conversation that was just between the two of us." Catherine's eyes widened slightly, and he saw understanding and anticipation dawn in her expression. "What did you talk about?" "I asked for her blessing to marry you," Cole said simply. "I told her that I love you and want to spend my life with you, and I asked if she would support that decision. She said yes, Catherine. She gave me her blessing with her whole heart, but her blessing is not the only one I need. I need yours too." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small gold ring, holding it up so it caught the sunlight and gleamed like a promise. "I know this is fast, and I know we have not known each other very long in terms of time. But I feel like I have known you forever in terms of what matters. You fit into my life like you were always meant to be here, and I cannot imagine going back to how things were before I found you in that storm. Catherine Webb, would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife? Would you stay here with me and build a life together, one where we face whatever comes as partners and equals, supporting each other through hard times and celebrating the good ones together?" Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling as she reached out and took the ring from his hand, examining it with obvious emotion. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and certain despite the tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you. I will stay here with you and build the life we both want. I will be your wife and your partner, and I will love you with everything I have for as long as I live." Cole slipped the ring onto her finger, relieved and delighted when it fit perfectly, and then he pulled Catherine into his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion and promise he felt coursing through his entire being. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, and they stayed there on the blanket overlooking the valley of flowers for a long time, holding each other and talking about their future and occasionally kissing until they were both breathless and flushed with desire. They would have to wait to fully express until after they were properly married. They set the wedding date for late June, giving Aunt Margaret enough time to recover sufficiently to attend, and giving Cole and Matthew time to make some improvements to the ranch house that would accommodate a growing family. Catherine threw herself into preparations with the help of Rosa and several women from Marathon who had heard about the upcoming wedding, and insisted on contributing their skills and support. The ceremony took place in the small church in Marathon on a Sunday afternoon that was blessedly free of storms or excessive heat, with nearly the entire population of the surrounding area in attendance, because frontier communities loved any excuse for celebration, and a wedding was cause for particular joy. Catherine wore a simple but beautiful dress of white cotton that she had sewn herself with Rosa's assistance, and Cole wore his best suit that had belonged to his father, altered slightly to fit his broader shoulders. Aunt Margaret sat in the front row, her injuries still visible but her face radiant with happiness as she watched her niece marry the man who had saved both their lives. Matthew stood up beside Cole as his best man, looking proud and a little emotional in his own new suit. Rosa wept openly through the entire service, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief and muttering prayers of gratitude in Spanish. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and told Cole he could kiss his bride, the church erupted in applause and cheers, and Cole felt a joy so profound it seemed to radiate from his very bones. He kissed Catherine with tenderness and promise, and she clung to him as if he were her anchor in a storm, which in many ways he supposed he was and always would be. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by everyone who attended. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Cole danced with his new wife under the stars while Matthew played his fiddle, and Rosa supervised the food distribution with the authority of a benevolent general commanding her troops. When the guests finally departed and the household settled into quiet, Cole carried Catherine across the threshold of his bedroom in the traditional gesture of husbands claiming their brides, and they spent their wedding night discovering each other with a combination of tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and amazed at the intensity of their connection. In the weeks and months that followed, Catherine transformed from a guest into the true mistress of the Brennan Ranch, working alongside Cole and Matthew to build something sustainable and prosperous. She proved to have a remarkable head for numbers, and began managing the ranch's accounts and correspondence, freeing Cole to focus more on the physical work of running cattle and maintaining the property. She also started a small school in one of the unused outbuildings, teaching the handful of children from neighboring ranches to read and write and cipher, bringing education to an area that had desperately needed it. Aunt Margaret recovered fully from her injuries, though she walked with a slight limp and her left arm never regained its full strength. Rather than trying to make a life alone in Alpine or returning to Houston, she accepted Cole and Catherine's invitation to live permanently on the ranch, occupying the guest room that had once belonged to Cole's mother, and making herself useful by helping with the cooking and mending and providing Catherine with companionship and support. The first year of their marriage was not without challenges. There were droughts that threatened the water supply and made the cattle restless. There were occasional conflicts with neighboring ranchers over grazing rights and water access. There was the constant hard work of maintaining a ranch in an unforgiving environment. But through it all, Cole and Catherine faced each obstacle together, their love deepening with every challenge overcome and every quiet moment shared. In the spring of 1879, Catherine discovered she was pregnant, and Cole's joy at the news was so exuberant that he lifted her off her feet and spun her around until Rosa scolded him for being too rough with an expectant mother. The pregnancy progressed smoothly despite Catherine's morning sickness in the early months, and she continued working almost until the very day she went into labor on a cold November afternoon. Cole paced the main room like a caged animal, while Rosa and Aunt Margaret attended Catherine in the bedroom, Matthew trying unsuccessfully to distract him with conversation about entirely unimportant things. The hours seemed to stretch endlessly, and Cole found himself praying with an intensity he had not experienced since his father's final illness, begging God to keep both Catherine and the baby safe. When Rosa finally emerged with a tired but triumphant smile and announced that he had a healthy son, Cole nearly collapsed with relief. He rushed into the bedroom to find Catherine propped up against the pillows, exhausted and flushed but radiantly happy, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up as he entered, and the love shining in her eyes made him fall in love with her all over again, even deeper than before if such a thing were possible. "Meet your son," she said softly, adjusting the blanket so Cole could see the baby's face, red and wrinkled and impossibly perfect. "I thought we could name him Robert after my uncle. He brought us together in a way, even though he did not live to see it happen." Cole sat carefully on the edge of the bed, afraid to disturb Catherine but desperate to be close to his new family. He reached out with one tentative finger to touch his son's tiny hand, and when the baby's fingers closed around his, Cole felt something shift in his heart, an expansion of love he had not known was possible. "Robert is a perfect name," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "He would be honored, I think, to know we remembered him this way." Little Robert Brennan grew into a sturdy, curious child who loved following his father around the ranch and helping with chores as soon as he was old enough to walk steadily. 2 years later, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret after her aunt. And then 3 years after that came another son they called Thomas after Sheriff Garrett, who had become a good friend to the family over the years. The ranch prospered under Cole's management and Catherine's careful financial oversight, growing from a modest cattle operation into one of the most successful ranches in Brewster County. They hired additional hands to help with the work, built a larger barn and several new outbuildings, and even purchased additional acreage from a neighbor who decided to move back east. Matthew eventually married as well, courting and winning the heart of the schoolteacher who had taken over Catherine's small school when she became too busy with her own children to continue teaching. Matthew built a house on the far side of the ranch property, and he and his wife raised their own family while continuing to work the land alongside Cole. Aunt Margaret lived to see all her great-nieces and great-nephews born, taking particular joy in watching the children grow and thrive in the vast open spaces of West Texas. She died peacefully in her sleep in 1889, at the age of 63, surrounded by the family she had gained through tragedy and blessed by years of happiness she had not expected to experience after losing her husband so suddenly. The years flowed past like water in the creek that bordered the eastern edge of the ranch, bringing changes both large and small. The wild frontier that Cole and Catherine had known gradually became more settled and civilized, with better roads and more towns, and even a railroad connection that made it easier to ship cattle to market. The dangers that had once defined daily life became less immediate, though the land remained harsh and unforgiving to those who did not respect it. Cole's hair began to gray at the temples, and lines appeared at the corners of Catherine's eyes, but their love remained as strong and vital as it had been that day when he proposed to her overlooking the Valley of Wildflowers. They still rode out together when time permitted, escaping the chaos of their busy household to spend quiet hours talking and laughing and remembering the storm that had brought them together. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Cole took Catherine back to that same overlook, where wildflowers still carpeted the valley below in waves of color every spring. Their children were grown by then, Robert working the ranch alongside his father, Margaret married to a banker in Alpine and expecting her first child, and Thomas studying law in San Antonio with plans to return to West Texas and practice there. You ever regret it? Cole asked as they sat on the same rise where he had proposed 2 decades earlier. Staying here instead of going to a city where life might have been easier. Marrying a cowboy instead of someone who could have given you fine dresses and a big house and servants to do the hard work. Catherine turned to him with surprise and something like indignation in her green eyes, which had lost none of their intensity over the years. Cole Brennan, if you think for one single second that I regret any part of the life we have built together, then you are the most foolish man in all of Texas. You gave me everything I ever wanted. You gave me a home and a family and a purpose. You gave me love that has sustained me through hard times and made the good times even sweeter. You gave me children who are strong and good and who will carry our legacy forward into whatever future awaits them. She took his hand, the simple gold ring he had placed there 20 years ago still gleaming on her finger. That storm that nearly killed me, it was the best thing that ever happened to me because it brought me to you. And I would walk through 1,000 storms if I knew you were waiting at the end of them to carry me inside by the fire and make me feel safe and loved and cherished. So no, Cole, I do not regret one single moment of our life together. Cole pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair and feeling the solid reality of her body against his. I love you, Catherine Brennan. I loved you from the moment I found you in that storm, and I will love you until the day I die and beyond if such things are possible. I love you too, Catherine whispered. Always and forever, no matter what comes, we will face it together just like we always have. They sat there on the rise until the sun began to set, painting the sky in the same brilliant colors that had witnessed Cole's proposal so many years before. And when they finally rode back to the ranch house where lamplight glowed in the windows and the sounds of family and home welcomed them, they rode hand in hand, their hearts full of gratitude for the life they had built from the ashes of tragedy and the promise of a stormy night when fate had brought them together. The years continued to pass, bringing grandchildren who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter, bringing losses and joys in equal measure, bringing the slow but steady march of progress that transformed the West from wild frontier to settled homeland. Through it all, Cole and Catherine remained devoted partners, their love story serving as an example and inspiration to their children and grandchildren and everyone who knew them. When Cole died in 1915 at the age of 62, peacefully in his sleep after a full day working the land he loved, Catherine grieved deeply, but without despair. She knew they had been blessed with more years together than many couples ever received, and that their love had created something lasting and beautiful that would continue long after both of them were gone. She spent her remaining years surrounded by family on the ranch they had built together, telling stories about the storm that had changed everything and the cowboy who had carried her inside by the fire and given her a life beyond anything she had ever dreamed possible. Catherine passed away in 1922 at the age of 66, with her children and grandchildren gathered around her bed. Her last words were of Cole, speaking his name with such love and longing that everyone present felt tears spring to their eyes. They buried her beside him in the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the ranch, beneath a shared headstone that reads simply, Cole and Catherine Brennan, beloved parents and grandparents, together always. The ranch remained in the Brennan family for generations, passed down from parents to children who remembered the story of their ancestors and the storm that had brought them together. The house Cole's father had built, and that Cole and Catherine had filled with love and laughter, still stood, expanded and improved over the years, but retaining the massive stone fireplace where Cole had first carried Catherine on that violent stormy night that seemed like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. And sometimes, on evenings when storms rolled across the Texas prairie with thunder and lightning and driving rain, the descendants of Cole and Catherine Brennan would gather around that same fireplace, and tell the story of the woman who was drenched from the storm when he found her, and the cowboy who carried her inside by the fire. They would talk about how tragedy had become triumph, how a moment of desperate need had sparked a love that lasted beyond death, how two people who might never have met in ordinary circumstances had found each other in extraordinary ones and built something beautiful that endured long after they were gone. The story became a family legend, repeated with variations and embellishments over the decades, but always returning to the essential truth at its core. That love can emerge from the most unexpected places, that kindness and courage can transform lives, and that sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as disasters, bringing us exactly where we need to be even when we cannot see the path ahead. Robert Brennan, the son Cole and Catherine had named after the uncle whose death had inadvertently brought them together, eventually became the patriarch of the family, running the ranch with the same dedication and integrity his father had modeled. He made sure his own children understood the importance of their family history, of remembering that they descended from people who had faced tremendous hardship and loss, but had chosen love and hope and resilience over bitterness and despair. The land itself seemed to remember too, the prairie grasses whispering secrets to anyone who knew how to listen, the wind carrying echoes of laughter and love across the valleys and rises where Cole and Catherine had ridden together so many times. The creek still flowed along the eastern boundary, the wildflowers still carpeted the valley in spring, and the old fence line where Cole had first found Catherine still marked the southern edge of the property, a monument to the moment when everything changed. In the end, the story of Cole and Catherine Brennan became more than just a family history. It became a testament to the enduring power of love, to the truth that our darkest moments can lead to our brightest futures, and to the simple but profound reality that sometimes salvation comes not in the form we expect, but in exactly the form we need. A storm, a collapse, a desperate walk through rain and mud and darkness, and a cowboy who chose to ride a little farther than he had planned became the foundation for a love that shaped generations, and reminded everyone who heard the tale that miracles can emerge from tragedy when people choose courage and compassion over fear and indifference. The ranch prospered through economic depressions and world wars, through droughts and floods, and all the challenges that tested frontier families and their descendants. The Brennan name became synonymous with integrity and generosity in Brewster County, with fair dealing and community support and the kind of quiet strength that defined the best of the Western spirit. And always, woven through every generation's achievements and struggles, was the story of Cole and Catherine, the reminder of where they had come from and what they had overcome to build the legacy that sustained them all. Margaret Brennan, the daughter named for Catherine's aunt, made sure the family history was written down properly when she grew old, spending years interviewing relatives and researching records to create a comprehensive account that would preserve the truth for future generations who might never have the chance to hear it directly from those who had lived it. Her book, published privately for family distribution in 1935, became a cherished possession that was passed down and read and reread, its pages growing worn with love and use. The photographs that accompanied the text showed Cole and Catherine at various stages of their life together, young and vibrant on their wedding day, mature and confident with their growing children arranged around them, elderly but still clearly in love with their arms around each other on the porch of the house where they had built their life. In every image, the bond between them was visible, a connection that transcended the limitations of old black and white photography and spoke directly to anyone who looked at their faces and saw the truth written there. Thomas Brennan, the youngest child who had become a lawyer as he had planned, used his legal skills to ensure the ranch would remain in the family regardless of economic pressures or changing times. He created trusts and partnerships that protected the land while allowing it to continue generating income, and he made sure every Brennan descendant understood their responsibility to preserve what Cole and Catherine had built through their love and labor. The 20th century brought changes that would have seemed like impossible magic to Cole and Catherine. Technologies and social transformations that reshaped every aspect of life in ways they could never have imagined. But the fundamental truths they had lived remained constant. That love matters more than material wealth. That character reveals itself in how we treat others when we have nothing to gain. That family and community provide meaning and purpose that transcend individual ambition. And that the choices we make in moments of crisis define not just our own lives, but the lives of everyone who comes after us. The old stone fireplace, where Cole had first laid Catherine down, still provided warmth on cold nights, though it was supplemented now by modern heating systems that would have amazed the original builders. The land still supported cattle, though the methods of ranching had evolved dramatically from the days when cowboys rode the fence line with nothing but a horse and a rope and their own grit to depend on. The house had been expanded and updated, but its core remained the same, a testament to the solid craftsmanship of men who built things to last. And on stormy nights, when thunder rolled across the Texas prairie and lightning split the sky, the Brennan descendants would gather and remember the storm that had started it all, the violent tempest that had nearly killed Catherine Webb, but instead had delivered her to the man who would love her for the rest of his life. They would look out the windows at the rain and wind and be grateful for the shelter their ancestors had built, for the legacy of love and strength that had given them all a foundation to stand on. The story lived on, told and retold, adapted to new times but always maintaining its essential truth. Great-great-grandchildren who had never known Cole and Catherine, except through photographs and stories, nevertheless felt connected to them, inspired by their example, determined to honor their memory by living lives of equal courage and integrity. The ranch became a gathering place for reunions and celebrations, a touchstone that reminded scattered descendants of their shared history and common values. Eventually, more than a century after that stormy April night in 1878, a young Brennan descendant stood in the old ranch house and looked at the stone fireplace, and tried to imagine what it must have been like for Cole to carry a frightened, half-drowned stranger into this room and lay her down beside the fire. The fireplace was the same one, remarkably unchanged despite the passage of so many years, and the young woman felt a shiver that had nothing to do with cold as she contemplated the moment that had made her own existence possible. Without that storm, without Catherine's desperate walk through the rain, without Cole's decision to ride just a little farther before turning back, none of them would be here. Every Brennan living in the 21st century owed their existence to a series of accidents and choices that had brought two strangers together in the most unlikely of circumstances. It was humbling and awesome to consider, this long chain of cause and effect that stretched back through generations to a single transformative night. The legacy of Cole and Catherine Brennan was not just the land they had accumulated or the family they had raised, though both were impressive achievements. Their true legacy was the example they had set, the proof that love could flourish even in the harshest environments, that tragedy could be transformed into triumph, that choosing kindness and courage in the face of difficulty could create ripples that extended far beyond their own lives and times. They had shown that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when motivated by love and guided by integrity, and that the choices made in moments of crisis could echo through centuries. The ranch still stood, a living monument to their love and labor. The land still nurtured cattle and crops, and the people who worked it. The house still sheltered families who carried the Brennan name and blood. And the story still inspired, still reminded everyone who heard it that miracles happen not because of fate or luck, but because of people who choose to act with compassion and courage when circumstances test them most severely. Cole Brennan had been just a cowboy, a rancher trying to make a living in an unforgiving land. Catherine Webb had been just a seamstress and teacher, an orphan dependent on relatives who had then died and left her alone again. Neither of them had been special or privileged or destined for greatness by any conventional measure. But together, through their love and partnership and shared determination to build something meaningful from the ruins of tragedy, they had created a legacy that outlasted them by generations and showed no signs of fading even as the years continued to pass. The storm had passed more than a century ago, but its effects continued to shape lives and inspire hearts. The cowboy who had carried a drenched stranger inside by the fire had become a symbol of masculine strength tempered by tenderness, of duty combined with compassion. The woman who had survived impossible odds to find help for her dying aunt had become a symbol of feminine resilience and courage, of grace under pressure, and the power of love to sustain us through our darkest hours. Their story was a love story, pure and simple, but it was also so much more than that. It was a story about the West, and the people who had tamed it, about the values that had allowed civilization to take root in wilderness, about the bonds of family and community that had enabled survival in places where survival was never guaranteed. It was a story about hope and redemption, about second chances and new beginnings, about the mysterious ways that loss can lead to gain when we remain open to possibility, even in the midst of grief.